The valley lay under a swollen red moon that night, the light a bruised coin in the sky. The drums began before the first torch, a slow, iron heartbeat that rolled across the clay roofs and silvered the river. In the dim, shadowed lanes a war party moved like a tide of blades and chant. They called the verse aloud, low and relentless. When Red Moon's child stands among us, the crown shall fall. Asha crouched in the doorway of her hut with a tiny weight against her chest. The baby was a thrum beneath her ribs, warm, fragile, sleeping under her wrapped shawl. Men banged down the neighbor's door. Voices rose like fire. She heard the soldiers' footsteps, felt their searchlights sweep the mud, smelled smoke. There was no time for thinking. She wrapped the child tighter. As soldiers near her door, the husband ran out with what looked like a baby colt, and soldiers pursued, running after him like a cat pursues its rat prey. He ran towards the market and they pursued him with greater vigor. As they neared him, he threw the basket into the bush and continued running. The soldiers pursed and ransacked the bush, finding the baby colt but not the child. It was then done on them that it was a diversion. Meanwhile, as the soldiers pursue her husband, Asha slipped out the back, and in the chaos, screaming women, a toppled grain cart, a sliding dog, she made herself invisible. She ran the pathway she remembered only in nightmares, past the women carrying water, past the stall with the blue cloth, and reached the river where a battered skiff waited. She tripped a grain cart to block the pursuit, wrenched free the oars, and pushed the boat into the river with a child hidden beneath a loose blanket. A soldier's torch flashed across the water. Asha held the infant against her, whispering a lullaby that braided longing and courage. She watched the embers of her home vanish upstream, then rowed until the reeds swallowed the night. She rowed until the moon slid thin behind clouds, then to a new shore where dawn was a cold gray promise. At daybreak the skiff found a small coastal port, low huts, bent palms, the market already beginning to set up. Asha staggered ashore, clutching the sack to her chest and blinking salt water from her eyes. She bartered the last of her jewelry for shelter and work, trading stories in hushed, curt phrases. She did not let the people of the village know where she had come from, what she had left, or why she had the infant's lullaby still on her tongue. She buried the past under daily labor. She cooked for fishermen, mended nets, and learned to hide the scorch marks on her palms where the fire in the other village had licked at her skin. When the baby woke and cried, she soothed him with a song she had once been sung to. It became a private compass for both of them. As days turned into months, she stopped hiding the child and gave him a small name that sounded like the locals. The market villagers called him Django. He grew under the open eaves and the rhythm of tides. Asha kept watch over him with a protective fierceness that softened only when she laughed at the boy's clumsy attempts to imitate the dockman's dances. She made a life that was blunt and steady. She taught Django to carry loads, to bargain without rancor, to keep secrets, and how to feed an old man who could not pay. They had enough, nights with a small hearth and laughter carried by the scent of stew. When Django became a man in his mid-20s, he moved through the market like a living drumbeat, heaving sacks, climbing crate stacks, spinning a stolen tambourine, making children laugh. He was broad-shouldered and quick of foot. He loved food and always returned for seconds. He was famous for his balance, 100 sacks on a head, a grin in his mouth, a song in his step. Asha ran a stall where stews steamed and herbs steamed with steam. She would watch him from under her cloth canopy, eyes shadowed by worry that she never spoke. Django hummed the lullaby sometimes under his breath and made little toy drums that he sold to children for copper and stories. Far upriver, in a village of red clay rooftops, old Nia sat bent over a thin fire and hummed lines she had sung since she was a child. The villagers had called her the griot, keeper of songs and memory. She read the village omens in the smoke, and lately there had been too many omens. Kilio's men on the trade roads, a fresh spine of rumors like a new wind. In the hushed hut, the elders listened as old Nia drew the corners of the prophecy from the web of memory. The red moon, the child who would come from the valley to conquer, the drum that was both oracle and covenant. She did not speak everything aloud. Some lines she kept tucked away like. On a hot, dusty road a caravan's camel drivers were ambushed. Kilio's scouts, lean, cruel, ripped through guards and took goods. Rumors ran like smoke. Kilio was amassing power in the broken north, gathering men hungry for strength and the promise of a single simple thing, dominance. The stunned trader who escaped the raid limped into the coastal port to warn of the banditry. News traveled quickly. Kilio's ambition was not just for plunder but for a symbol, the oracle drum that gave claim and meaning to the valley's balance. When a few of Kilio's men drifted into the market under the pretense of being traders, they tried to jolt a caravan. Django was the first to react. He tripped a man with a sack, sent a line of baskets into a heap that blocked a narrow lane, and, with a dancer's flourish, used a pile of calabashes like shields and projectiles. He did not fight like a trained guard. He used rhythm and crowd logic. His movements were not formal but effective. The market people laughed and cheered as the thieves tumbled away, bruised and bewildered. No one in the port had ever seen anything like it, and talk spread like fire. The elders gathered in their shade. Mwenga, the keeper of Sakala, the valley's old combat group, stood clothed in patient restraint. The five keepers, a disciplined group who had kept the rituals and guard the village for decades, met in the circle and frowned at a threat that felt larger than any of them. They discussed sending scouts, binding neighbors, and doing what the valley had always done: keep the village safe. Mwenga was worried, for Sakala was thinning like old cloth. Young people seldom took it up the way they had. The elders realized their numbers might not be enough if Kilio moved as the rumors said. Scouts came ahead of the light, faces tanned and tight. They told of a whisper that the prophecy had begun to hum in the air again. A man from a valley in Red Moon lore would rise. Asha's face pinched at the words. She folded hands over the little cloth she had kept, something gifted from her life before. Django looked up at the mention of prophecy and felt a hollow stir he could not name. One morning, Asha suggested they move to another village to begin life afresh. She worries for the safety of her child and just wanted a place to hide. Django, however, objected and explained that they are doing well now and it would be difficult to start afresh in another village. He also reasoned that Kielo's exploit was not just in their village but stretches into other territories. A late morning ritual under the small port's baobab proved stilted and nervous. The elders sought a new guardian through a humble rite, but in the restless air there were no obvious answers. The people turned their attention outward and toward the market where Django stood, hands on a sack, grin cocked. Voices rose and pointed at him. His improvisation at the caravan had been carried by gossip into the elders' circle. Mwenga agreed to watch him, though his eyebrows pulled in. The five keepers shifted their weight and did not smile. When they called Django to perform in the yard, he came with the whole market in tow. He danced, he lifted, he joked, but when asked to stand in a line with the keepers he stumbled. There was an awkwardness to formal posture, and he had no training in the old forms. His jokes in the face of discipline grated. A keeper sneered. The crowd chattered. Yet beneath that clumsy show there was a muscle of something else. An instinctive rhythm that matched the drumbeat he had never studied and a reflex that used everyday things as tools of survival. At the edge of the port, Kilio's scouts moved, probing defenses and asking questions with sharp, well-practiced words. One of them saw Asha bending over a pot, noticed the scar on the inside of her wrist and seemed to hesitate. He tucked the sight away. The man left the port to carry what he had seen along the road to Kilio, who would take any small thread and weave it into reason to move. They brought Django to the Sakala yard. Wooden poles marked space where guards had long practiced. Drums lay on their sides. Mwenga stood like stone and called for form. The early lessons were humbling: stance, breath, the synchronization of foot and drum. Django cracked jokes. He could not hold still to the old lengthy waltz of stance and posture. His muscle wanted to burst into movement that was bright and full of life. The keepers watched his graceless attempts and gritted their teeth. But there were moments when his improvisation solved a balance problem or turned the expected into unanticipated advantage. Mwenga narrowed his eyes and began to see something. A formal drill asked Django to mimic a sweep and a hold. He failed, then succeeded by inventing a sweep with a basket. The keepers whispered that this was blasphemy, turning sacred motion into market trickery. Mwenga let the argument pass at first because a trainee is often a provocation. Yet quietly he recorded, with a mind like a net, each clever deflection Django made. Kilio did not wait to amass the whole valley. He struck a further outpost and burned it clean to clay and thunder. Families who had lived on the river's edge watched their huts go and fled. Zuri, Kilio's cold lieutenant, sent a whisper into the air that sought someone who remembered the old raid, someone from the Red Moon night. The whole valley tightened like a fist. Temba, a keeper of middle years with hands grayed by weaving, took Django aside. He did not speak much of honor. He spoke of rhythm and cloth, the way a warp must be held consistent while the weft moves. He taught Django footwork as weaving the floor, how the foot tucked and the body released pressure. He showed him how an ordinary sling could be a cord of defense when you knew which way to pull. Django listened as if learning the pattern of a song. Temba softened. Django found his way to old Nia's hut one dusk. She was a thin thing with eyes like burnished coal. He asked her about the prophecy. She told him the old songs, the drum story, cautioning him that songs often shifted like smoke when repeated by those who sought power. She hummed a line that was not the full verse. Prophecies are warnings, she said, but men who want to be kings cut the warning into a crown. Django left with more questions than answers. A market trader who had fled the original raid returned and recognized the particular way Asha tilted her head, a posture of a woman who had survived a specific loss. He touched his chest as if to stop the memory. The trader would not accuse her in public, but he spoke by night with Kilio's scouts. Gossip moved on the wind. Asha's hands clenched one night as she turned the pot lid. She had to tell Django something. If she were found, the child she had carried would be in peril. Days fell into pattern. Django practiced until his palms thickened and his breath learned the drum's cadence. He turned a net into a garrote, a basket into a shield. He learned to read an enemy's stride by listening to the rhythm of breath and footfall. Where Mwenga placed emphasis on lineage and form, Django translated form into function. Temba sang soft patterns while Django moved. The market's clamor became a teacher. Cartwheels, drumming feet, the clang of fish against crate. Zuri's agents planted a rumor. The oracle drum had been moved to the coast for safety. It was a lie designed to scatter vigilance. They staged a petty raid to prove the rumor and to test the port's response. The keepers responded, and found the false trail. The valley shivered. The trader returned in the heat of midday, eyes like knives. He knew Asha's hands from the Red Moon night and confronted her in the alley. There were not enough guards to stop the words spilling out. Asha sat on a low bench and let the dust settle on her shoulders as she told the truth. She took the small cloth from under her skirt and smoothed it like a prayer. "He is not of this port," she said. "I found him wrapped in beans the night they came. I named him Django and raised him here." She sang the old lullaby that had been on her lips in the skiff. Django, hearing the tune, felt an old seam open inside him as if a mended dress had been cut. He saw a fragment, a lamplit room and a man standing over a drum with hands stretched to the child. Tears and fury mixed in him. He had been the remedy and the disease. Was he the omen? Asha's confession turned the warm market into a place of cold questions. He went to the river and sat with his feet in the water, thinking. He saw the village from the lullaby, smoke, the drum rolled away, a man kneeling to pick up a child and hand him to a woman who ran. He felt guilt for sins he had not committed and fear that his life could bring ruin to the people who had loved him. He almost left the port that night. Mwenga found him under a rigging of nets, sat beside him and said, "You were not asked to be born. You were however asked to choose what kind of man you would be." That phrase loosened something in Django. He returned to training with a different focus. No longer did he train to prove himself. He trained because the village needed him. Mwenga changed his instruction. He taught Django to use his market instincts inside the ritual frame, to make improvisation precise. He taught restraint alongside creativity. There were small victories. A complicated footwork pattern learned in a single night, a net throw that snagged an imaginary opponent's ankle cleanly. The keepers watched differently. Kilio's fires burned further. He sent word across ravines that the valley must bow to his hand or be broken. He displayed the ceremonial object he had stolen earlier, a carved head that mocked the drum's holy face, and claimed divine favor. Men flocked to him with hungry eyes. Zuri watched the port from a distance and smiled. He had a plan that would separate the valley and let power take hold. At night Django dreamt of the lamplit room again, clearer now, his father's hands on the drum's underside a map of dents and old glue. Sometimes he stepped in his training and his body remembered a small child's cadence as if innate. Each flash made him more certain that the truth about the prophecy was not as it had been told. As pressure rose, so did argument. One keeper argued for iron discipline, for fortifications and refusal to show mercy. Another argued for sharing knowledge and adapting the Sukala so more people could defend themselves. Old divisions spat hot again, and the valley's cohesion frayed. Kilio staged a violent roadside assault to draw defenders away. While the keepers and volunteers rushed to intercept, Zuri would lead a stealth team into the drum ground. The elders argued. The valley's leaders decided to split their force. It felt like the only choice. Django argued to stay and protect home. He said, "They will come for what we guard." His voice tightened with the weight of his mother's song. The elders listened and sent another contingent. A small band stayed with Django. Zuri's men moved like shadows. They infiltrated the drum ground, cutting the thin rope lines that secured the shrine and overwhelming the smaller guard. In the dark of the edge of the circle, they intercepted one of the guards and learnt that not all of the guards had gone to the roadside distraction. With the lower fortification and wounds sustained in their initial fight, It became obvious to them that they would not win the war. They retreated to plan for their next strategies. The drum remained under threat, its casing scraped and its spirits bent by the intrusion. That night as Django came for his dinner and evening stories to the children, Asha pushed a small carved bead into his hand, the last physical tie to his place of birth. She sang the lullaby at the top of her lungs, and the sound threaded through the night air. The melody unlocked a vivid memory in Django. A man cradling a drum as if it were a child, bad light on his face, the fearful softness of hands that could kill or protect. In that flash he understood that the prophecy had been a warning about what happens when men weaponize fear. He felt the direction of his path change. Kielo's men returned the following week with greater men and weaponry. The keepers fought bravely, but the raid wounded more than bodies, it wounded faith. The elders muttered of surrender. Some held that killing Kilio would not free them of the prophecy. Others argued that they had already lost the right to keep anyone's secret. Django felt despair crawl up his legs like cold water. He looked at the faces of ordinary villagers hiding in a burned courtyard, old women, market children, and he felt the old shame of being both saved and the source of menace. He squared his shoulders and made a choice, either run and hide or stand and make something new. He chose to stand. Django convened the small group that still trusted him. Temba, 2 keepers who had softened toward him, Mwenga, and a handful of market folk. They would fight in a way Kilio did not expect. They would use rhythm and crowd sense, sound as a weapon, tools as shields, to fracture the enemy's order. They practiced synchronized drum beats that echoed across the fields and used market tools, nets, baskets, crates, as improvised armor. Their aim was not to slaughter but to disrupt and to rescue those taken, including Asha. They moved at dawn, a ragged, determined line. Django led with a simple drum strapped to his chest and a net slung over his shoulder. He taught the villagers to use beats to time their steps and to move like a single living weave. Kilio's camp lay ahead, a glint of metal and campfires. Django's band struck where the land narrowed. They set nets that trapped horses, they sent drums to make soldiers pause and look, and they used their knowledge of crowded space to turn the enemy's linear formations into confusion. Soldiers trained for open-field battle found themselves at a disadvantage in alleys of crate and drum. The keepers fought like a wedge and villagers turned fishing poles into hooks that dislodged shields. The enemy was thrown into waves of panicked reaction. Asha sat near a dull fire in Kilio's tense circle. Zuri came often and asked questions in a voice of oily patience. She answered with silence and small songs. When she hummed the lullaby it seemed to unsettle even Zuri. He could see the stubbornness in her face and it made him bruise with annoyance. She leaned on the memory of the skiff and the warmth of the baby she had hidden and chose resistance over confession. They converged at the Kielo's ground, an open circle with the raised platform of the forest in the center. Dust flew and drums beat. Kilio's men came in numbers, but the valley's defenders had the advantage of cause and of rhythm. The battle was less a clash of fists and more a contest of patterns. Nets became mazes. The crowd moved in a single percussive wave that disoriented the attackers. Django darted through openings like a sparrow, pulling men off balance with baskets and sudden movements. Zuri's lieutenant found Django and engaged him in a brutal fight. He was strong, formal, trained. Django was messy and alive. He entangled the lieutenant with a net, twisted a thrown calabash into a distraction, and used the man's forward momentum to send him stumbling into a row of crates. The lieutenant fell, bound, breathing hard. Django did not gloat. He helped up a fallen villager, handed the bound man to a keeper, and then moved on. Amid the chaos, Asha's voice rose again, soaring over the drum beats. Django paused, and the flash came. His father, a man with a small scar over one brow, had pressed his palm to the drum like someone closing a wound. He had pulled a child to safety, rolled the drum into hiding and told elders, "Listen to the drum, not to fear." Django understood. The prophecy had been a warning about what fear could make of a people. No conqueror had to be a slave to fate. A person could choose to protect rather than to dominate. He shored his resolve with mercy. Django found Kilio on the raised platform, sitting like a king among tents. Kilio was not larger than life. He was a man who had learned to use fear as a blade. They spoke quickly. Kilio spoke of destiny and order. Django spoke of choice and belonging. They fought. Kilio lunged with practiced brutality. Django moved like water, using Kilio's force to spin him toward his own men. The crowd watched as the fight became less a duel and more a revelation. Django refused to break his opponent with a killing strike. Instead, he disarmed Kilio and held him at the edge of defeat. Kilio's troops hesitated. A leader who demands slaughter but cannot command loyalty is brittle. The men looked at what they had been ordered to do and saw in Django not a god but a man who chose to spare them. Some stepped away. Others were seized by the keepers. Kilio was taken alive, bound not by vengeance but by the will of those who wanted judgment, not endless blood. The drum remained in the center, its surface scarred but intact. Asha was freed and fell into Django's arms. The valley gathered under the baobab. Old Nia stepped forward and let the full verse of the prophecy fall from her mouth, unadorned and without the fearful corners the elders had once put on it. It read not as a decree but as a warning about what men do when they choose fear over fellowship. The elders admitted that their secret of guarding and fear had helped fuel Kilio's rise. They apologized to those whose lives had been upended. There was no easy absolution, but there was an opening for repair. In the Sakala yard the keepers formed a circle. Mwenga, who had been skeptical of change, stepped forward and clasped Django's hand. "We will teach how to protect the drum and how to live with it," he said. "We will teach not to make prophecy a cage." They opened their ranks to those who had shown courage regardless of lineage. Temba taught weaving rhythms and market moves. The Sakala became a living thing again. At the river the sun rose with a promise of quiet. Asha and Django sat on the bank and let the water look at them. She smoothed the small carved bead on his palm, proof of where he had come from and of why she had turned her back from death to save him. She did not speak of all the nights she had spent awake listening for soldiers. Instead she smiled like a woman finally letting down a load. "You did not bring the prophecy," she said. "You brought a choice." Old Nia took a new rhythm and wove it with the lullaby and market beats. She sang of the drum not as fate but as memory. The song was a lesson. Remember the past but do not let the past make you cruel. The valley learned the new song quickly. Drums were played at market stalls. Children learned Sakala steps as dances. The old fear softened. Months later a red moon rose once more over the river valley. No one stopped sleeping. The moon hung the same, but now it was a red season that people greeted with hands on drums and not with knives. Django led a festival that mixed market clatter and ritual cadence. He beat a rhythm that stitched the lullaby and the market beat into one living tapestry. People danced, keepers and traders moved together. From the river the skiff bobbed as it always had. Asha watched him play and laughed, a sound that tasted like home. The camera of the mind drew back across the valley. Children, drums, a people who had chosen to hold one another and to remember the prophecy for what it had been, an echo now used to teach caution, not fear. The red moon slid on, indifferent, while the valley learned, steadied, and began to tell a different kind of story.